coming. My name is Julie Marks. I'm the founder and the director of the Vermont Short-Term Rental Alliance, which is a nonprofit business association for the vacation rental industry here in Vermont. As I just noted, we started this about 2 years ago and have been growing rapidly and organically. As you all know, the vacation rental industry here is very pervasive and deep rooted. So it's about time that the community has a mechanism for coming together and having a voice for representation. So I am here to talk to you today about the trends and opportunities that we're seeing in the vacation rental industry here in Vermont. But before I really dive into it, I wanted to introduce you to a short-term rental host. Kidding. That's not really what we look like. Although a lot of people think we do. So just to give you a little bit more background on me, I was born and raised in Heinsberg, Vermont. Went to high school at CVU, left Vermont for many years to study environmental science in Australia, dived the Great Barrier Reef, moved to Seattle, got my master's in environmental health science, worked for a great company called Seventh Generation in Burlington for about 10 years, moved back to Vermont to start my own environmental health consulting business, and ended up in the vacation rental industry instead. So some things you just can't plan, they just happen, but I've really been a short-term rental host in Vermont for about 5 years now. I also have gotten into providing housing in Burlington, so have just really enjoyed property management, hospitality, and all the flexibility that comes along with the industry and the lifestyle. And so in this presentation, I'm going to be giving you a lot of numbers. So I wanted to first put some visuals behind those numbers for you. This is kind of a spattering of short-term rental properties that are available to rent in Vermont right now. And you can see there's a wide variety. This was the most expensive one I could find. I think it rents for about $7,000 a night. Wow. 15 bedrooms.
Where is it?
I think it's in Stowe. We've got this cute little ADU, accessory dwelling unit, in the backyard of somebody's little forested property there. This awesome historic castle, also in Stowe, which you can rent. A couple of cool treehouse rentals. And then of course we got lots of these ski mountain condos, our classic lake camp. Glamping is blowing up right now. We're seeing a lot more of that coming onto the scene. The tiny house craze, still alive and well. Yurts and farm stays. And this is actually one of my properties in Burlington. It used to be a short-term rental. This little studio above the garage, we built it to be a short-term rental. It literally has a mini fridge built into the wall. And now the city has ruled that I'm not allowed to rent as a short-term rental. So hopefully I'll find a tenant who doesn't like to cook or store food. Okay, so today I'm going to start us off with some definitions and background, just to make sure we're on the same page. And then dive into some of the trends and insights we're seeing in the industry nationwide. Give you a deeper look into what's going on in Vermont here, and talk a little bit about the economic impacts and opportunities that we're seeing. And then I will pull out my crystal ball and try to tell you what's going to happen in the future. And then I really want to leave time at the end for questions and answers. So I'm sure people have questions. I hope you do. So happy to have a discussion afterwards. Good one. So, start with the basics. In 2018, the Vermont legislature passed Act 10, which is an act regulating short-term rentals for the state of Vermont. And it defines a short-term rental as a furnished home, condominium, or other dwelling room or self-contained dwelling unit rented to the transient, traveling, or vacationing public for a period of fewer than 30 consecutive days and for more than 14 days per calendar year. Essentially, if it's less than a month of a reservation, it's a short-term rental. If you're an operator who rents out your house or property for just 2 weekends a year or less than 14 days an entire year, this essentially says, we don't care about you, we're not going to track you, you can fly under the radar. That's what the 14 days refers to. A lot of people take advantage of just 1 or 2 holiday weekends. This is essentially saying we're not going to hold you responsible for taxes or anything like that when you're operating that casually. So we have regulation for short-term rentals at the state level through this act. But really all it did was create this definition, assign authority to regulate, giving municipalities the authority to regulate short-term rentals, giving the Department of Public Safety the authority to enforce fire safety standards, and the Department of Taxes to tax short-term rentals. So all short-term rentals are required to pay the 9% meals and rooms tax and the 1% local option tax where that's required. This act also put together some resources for short-term rental operators, including this form, which we call the STR obligations form. This is required to be completed by the owner and posted in every rental. The state also put out a 2-page information packet for operators with some information about safety guidelines and best practices around keeping a safe and clean environment. However, there seems to be a relatively low awareness of the existence of this form, but we've been trying to change that. And then at the municipal level, I'm sure you all have read the news or read Front Porch Forum. There's a lot going on at the town level. We are doing our best as an association to try to track and monitor that. So I'm not going to go into the details of what every town is doing. We do have a page on our website where we try to provide that information. It is self-reported from citizens, so it's probably not fully comprehensive, but it's an attempt. But I would say that towns across Vermont have several ways in which they seem to be addressing short-term rentals. One of them being contracting with a third-party short-term rental compliance service. And these are companies that use technology and software to enforce whatever short-term rental regulations the town is coming up with. So there's lots of new ways in which short-term rental operators who think they can just fly under the radar and not be seen, that is kind of the past. And I wanted to also make this distinction between a short-term rental, a licensed lodging establishment, and a long-term rental, as these definitions often get blurred or aren't fully understood. So, as I said before, a short-term rental is a reservation with a rental period of less than 30 days, but you cannot serve food. If you serve food at a short-term rental, you're required to have a license from the Department of Health. Short-term rental does not have 3 or more rental units on the same property. If you have 3 short-term rentals on your property, you need a license from the state of Vermont. Both lodging establishments and short-term rentals are required to collect and remit the 9% rooms tax and local option tax and comply with municipal zoning regulations. Long-term rentals really just hit this, when you hit the 30-day rental mark, you suddenly cross over into Vermont landlord-tenant law. And that's significant because as I'll show you later, we see a lot of crossover between short-term rental operators, especially more and more these days since the pandemic and remote working. People will go back and forth between offering their spaces for more than 30 days or less than 30 days without really realizing that that changes what laws and rights and protections that they have. So I'm just going to talk about this. I'm not the expert in the other two, but some of you are. Okay, so I also want to shed light on just some general types of short-term rentals because it is a very diverse set of properties and experiences. So when we talk about short-term rentals, we often group them into the categories of alternative or traditional. So alternative would be kind of your unplumbed, or it might be plumbed, but kind of not your standard living quarters, your some tree houses and tiny homes, etc. And then traditional would refer to your more kind of standard living quarters, but also include these seasonal camps and guest suites or rooms within a house. And there's essentially two ways that short-term rentals can be managed. They can either be owner managed, which in the industry we call RVO, which is rented by owner, and that could be the host, aka owner, is on site or off site. It works either ways, and this is generally the model that you see advertised on the online travel agencies like Airbnb or Vrbo. Professionally managed short-term rentals, or vacation rental managed, VRM, is when the owner of a property hires a full-service property management company to do all the work for them. This is properties you see advertised on Vacasa. Vacasa is a big property management company. Here in Stowe, we have Stowe Country Homes, Stowe Resort Homes, something like that. In Killington, we have a bunch. We see a lot of our local owned property management companies in our ski areas, mainly because that's where we see the most vacation rentals. And they often do advertise on Airbnb and Vrbo as well, but sometimes they will also just exclusively advertise on their own websites and their own direct booking platforms. So where do short-term rentals come from? We typically see short-term rentals falling into 5 different categories of origin. So they are traditionally you renting out a private room or guest suite in your house, in your primary residence. They could also be a whole home rental of your primary residence. So that's when you go out of town and you rent out your personal space. The whole home rental of a secondary residence. We see that a lot here in Vermont. We have a lot of second homeowners who have vacation homes that they rent them when they're not using them. And then the whole home rental of an investment property. Obviously self-explanatory, very hands-off, full-time commercial. And then the rental of an experiential space, which is that alternative short-term rental. And then there are generally 3 ways that they come into the market. One is because they were converted from a formerly vacant dwelling, or from a formerly occupied dwelling, or as a purpose-built or converted space. And this purpose-built or converted space, we're seeing a lot. Our estimate from a survey we did last year suggests that potentially up to a third of our short-term rentals have come from new construction or converted space. So most commonly a barn, people convert barns, or nowadays we're seeing people convert office spaces into short-term rentals. This is something we don't have a lot of good data on of where short-term rentals are coming from, like quantifying where they're coming from, but hopefully one day we will, and this is what I would like to see us look for. Okay, now I'm going to get into the data, but before I do, I want to just explain where it's coming from. So we have, key data and transparent are some of the biggest vacation rental data analyzers in the industry. We have a nice relationship with them. They give us some data for free when we ask for it, which is very kind. And we also use a lot of data from housingdata.org, which is powered by the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and that uses data from Airbnb, which they paid for. We also have a nice relationship with Airbnb and Vrbo. They give us some insider intel upon request, and then of course we use all the amazing data that the tourism department puts out. And like another side note on data, all these different data companies, there's a qualification with all the data. These numbers are really hard to consistently track as they're always changing. And so there is definitely an error bar. How big that error bar is still something we don't really know. But they collect data in different ways, so there's always a little bit of a caveat. But this is the best available information we have. So nationally, the vacation rental industry is huge and growing quickly. It's a $15 billion industry just in the US. Globally, it's massive. Vacation rental companies account for 1/3 of all privately owned accommodation establishments nationwide, and 70% are considered small businesses. And the demand for short-term rentals is growing. Vacation rental management companies in the US grew by almost 9% just last year. So that's definitely a strong indicator of job creation and demand for this type of travel. And short-term rental supply is, we are seeing that it's predicted to grow slower. Short-term rentals definitely had a moment during the pandemic, and we're seeing that kind of normalize and come back down. That boom in supply has definitely started catching up with demand. So we're seeing lower occupancy rates, lower nightly rates, and so we're starting to see that kind of come down. But there is still a demand, so expecting to see supply still grow, but slower. Some other interesting trends that are worth noting nationwide is that Airbnb reports 20% of all their bookings are for month-long rentals. Again, that is a phenomenon that I think really was sparked by the pandemic and this change in work life style. We know that almost 1/4 of all Americans have engaged with the short-term rental platform, and we're seeing millennials now with some good spending power, millennials being people between the ages of 25 to 40. 40% of them are booking online. And Gen Zers now are the new generation, and you can see how much of them have experienced a vacation rental, and so that might lead to future habits as they grow into their spending power as well. So why people are choosing vacation rentals and why it's so popular. People are searching for and requiring spaces that are pet-friendly, kid-friendly, suitable for large gatherings, multi-generational families, and they're also looking for sustainability features. EV charging stations are one of the most filtered by amenities, and solar powered properties seems to get a lot of attention. And then obviously the remote working features. So people are really looking for a home away from home where they can bring their family, bring their dog, work during the week, and play at night. So getting into Vermont, as of December 2022, Vermont has roughly 10,500 active whole home short-term rentals. So that excludes the rooms within a house, guest suite numbers, just whole home, which equates to 3% of Vermont's total housing stock. I know short-term rentals like to be blamed for the housing problems, but it's 3% of our housing stock. Whereas second homes in general make up 17% of our housing stocks. So imagine if all of them were vacation rentals. And this is what we know about who's running a short-term rental in Vermont. And this is from, I didn't put out the exact figures, but I'm happy to share them with you if you're interested. But this is from a survey we ran in 2021, where we had 230 respondents who all are Vermont short-term rental hosts. And the majority, so many more than 50%, were owned by people who are over the age of 55. We see that very consistently. There's a lot of people who are retired, are using this as a way to age in place. They're using it to fill rooms once their kids have left home, and in order to hold on to that house and hopefully pass it back to their kids when they're ready to come back. The majority are women-owned or managed, which is consistent in hospitality in general, owned by full or part-time Vermonters. I would say that about half are full-time and about 45% are part-time, meaning they are people who spend time in this community, whether it's a summer or a winter, or have been coming here for 20 years plus, with their family. They really do, they are part of our communities. And so they get really offended when they hear that, when they're called not part of the community, when they're called out-of-staters. So we like to call them part-time Vermonters to make them feel included. But in general, we see the very hands-off investor-run short-term rentals to be less than 10% here in Vermont. And that data comes from, is corroborated by our internal surveys, by talking directly with our professional property management companies here in Vermont, and also by data provided by Transparent. We know that 90% are occupied by their owners for personal use each year, which is also how we get that 10%. And that there's a huge overlap, again, in spaces being offered as monthly furnished rentals in addition to the short-term rental. And we also learned that, for the most part, somewhere between 75 and 80% seem to have a short-term rental just as a part of a small portfolio. So operating one or two short-term rentals. There's a very small percentage of people in Vermont who have the 6, 10, 15 property ownership. Another thing about STRs in Vermont is that it matters where you are. So this is kind of a density heat map of STRs per 100 housing units by county. You can see darker is higher density, higher concentration, and guess where this is? So Vermont County, aka Stowe, accounts for the highest density. Stowe does drive this number, obviously, but countywide it's about 8.4% STRs in the county, and you can kind of see the ski resort, the southern ski resorts are the darker areas as well. But when you look at the whole numbers, the absolute numbers, you can see that this changes a little bit. We still have a high abundance of short-term rentals in the ski counties, but more interestingly, the more urban counties like Chittenden County, it really changes when you look at the data in different ways. So on an absolute scale, 617 whole unit short-term rentals in Chittenden County, less than 1% of the housing. So the supply of whole unit short-term rentals by available length of stay, and again, this is data that comes from the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, housingdata.org. Here we are in 2022 is the latest available data that we have. This is our total of 10,500 short-term rentals. About 2,000 are exclusively offered as short-term rental for less than 30 days. The majority are also offered for monthly rentals, and I think what this speaks to is that demand. This is how big the demand for monthly furnished housing is in Vermont. It's huge. Supply of all short-term rentals by property type. This data is provided by Key Data, and they categorize short-term rentals into these different property types. So you can see, and then there's some that are unknown, and they're unknown based on the way that people categorize them in their advertisements. But you can see how this also lines up with the HFA data. Here is our whole unit short-term rental, and here's our shared home sharing room in a house or alternative rental. And one thing that I wanted to just remind you, again, what we don't know, this whole house is this, and this, and this, all together.
Right.
So
It's a mixed bag.
it's a mixed bag, and that's not really useful, really, because it has different consequences. You know that. Here's another look at the data, and the point I want to make here is, again, where you are matters. This is showing Grand Isle County, Orleans County, and Chittenden County, not ski destinations. But you can see that they have a very similar cyclical presence in short-term rentals. The peaks here are in the summer, and the valleys are in the winter, and there's a really modest growth since 2017. And this is Chittenden County. But when you look at Windsor and Lamoille County, they also share a similar curve, but a very different one. So this is really where we see both the rapid growth and the higher abundance of short-term rentals. So moving on to economic impacts. This is a really important piece that I don't think gets enough attention or credit, and is also an area where I wish we had more data, but this is what we have right now. So in 2021 and 2022, vacation rentals contributed $36, $48 million respectively to Vermont's general fund. That's huge. Locally, for towns that have the local option tax, which I don't know why they wouldn't want to tap into this, you can see how much vacation rentals are adding to their annual budgets. In Stowe, which you have the very expensive and high abundance, you know, they're adding last year $750,000 to their town budget, just from vacation rentals, just from that local option tax. Town of Wilmington is a little bit smaller, but still pretty good chunk of money. And here's some averages. I hate averages, but again, this is kind of the best that we have at the moment. We know from our partners that the average short-term rental property earns the owner between $30,000 and $40,000 a year. I would say that's for a very average property. Maybe something that's going for $200 a night. The average daily rate in Vermont last year was $337. Again, that's an average when you think about that $7,000 a night house and the $30 bedroom. But it's a really lucrative industry, and managers are earning a good salary, $70,000 a year. That's hard to find in Vermont. We know a little bit about short-term rental visitors as well. Short-term rentals welcomed over 1 million, or welcomed 325,000 guests in 2021 and 443,000 guests in 2022 for over 1 million nights. Generally the length of stay has stayed consistent for being around 4 days, and we're expecting that to kind of remain steady. But our total heads and beds count, which we learned recently for the solar eclipse, is about 85,000, and that would include the rooms in a house as well. So there's a lot of room for people to come and enjoy Vermont in a lot of different ways, which is exciting. And another thing that I would love to have, which we don't yet, is how this compares to hotels. We know that the average occupancy for a hotel room is 1 to 2 people. The average occupancy for a short-term rental is 5 to 7 people. So totally different population in terms of how they're traveling. So that would be interesting to kind of be able to compare the industries. So again, why we see people coming to stay in a short-term rental is because they're looking for that larger group accommodation. They're looking for cooking amenities and that privacy. Yesterday I was in a session with Todd, and he's talking about how to make housekeeping more efficient. Maybe you don't offer it every day, but some people really like that. That's probably true for hotel goers. Short-term rental visitors we see they really need their privacy. They're not interested in somebody coming into their space during their stay. They may not even want to interact with the host at all. They want contactless, totally private experience. And they just want you on hand in case there's an emergency. But so it makes it easier for them to stay longer. Again, they can bring their dog, they can bring their work, and they're often, the place itself is the experience that they're looking for. So they may not be just coming back for a place to sleep. They might be there all day long, hanging out on the deck, and that's their vacation. So it's very distinct from the kind of the hotel offering, which is great to have both. We also know from courtesy of Airbnb that 41% of their guests spending occurs in the town where they are. So when we think about our Vermont rural communities that don't have hotels, they're staying at short-term rentals and going to the local restaurant or the local grocery store or gas station. So that's a really important part, especially in those rural economies. And we know that 92% of hosts on Airbnb say that they recommend local businesses and attractions to their guests. I would love to know more about that. And we are doing everything we can to help facilitate that. I think that is a really important part of this whole industry, is connecting this with this. Okay, here's my crystal ball. So I'm going to start with the challenges, so I can end on a higher note. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of localized restrictions coming up, and that creates a challenge not only for owners but for travelers, because they can't consistently find what they're looking for in the state of Vermont. It also puts towns competitively against each other. If Wilmington says no short-term rentals, that's fine. Dover will get all of them, or the surrounding communities. And so it also makes it very difficult to track and to enforce when the rules are so inconsistent. Short-term rentals are also coming up against challenges with neighbor relations, and just gonna say it, NIMBYism. And this is a really emotional aspect of this industry that, if I'm being honest, hasn't been addressed in a very thoughtful and welcoming way. It's been very aggressive, and it's been very personal and personalized on Front Porch Forum, in the media, and there hasn't been much facilitation to have a real level-headed conversation about how we live with vacation rentals.
Can you share what NIMBYism is for people?
NIMBYism is not in my backyard ism. And we see that a lot. We've seen it in the media. Somebody says, oh, I used to short-term rent the property I bought, and I rented it short-term for 3 years, and then I moved into it, settled my family, and now I'm against it because I don't like my neighbor doing the same thing that I did. But that seems to be happening a lot. Or people who hate short-term rentals say they hate them, but then go and stay in them. And then there's, this is perpetuated by a lot of false perceptions about short-term rentals. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of old anecdotes that are still, I think, at the surface for people, again, emotionally. So, constantly combating this image and falsehoods, like the photo I started with. I think, as an organization, one of the things that we're trying to do is really shed light on who is the industry and who is not, and create those standards and that education for not just operators, but for the whole community to really understand how they fit in, that they fit in, and be able to value it for what it is. So opportunities are, I think, countless, but here is my top list. We are still seeing short-term rental demand, and we're going to see continued short-term rental demand, and it's going to keep growing. It's just becoming a way of life. It's an expectation for the younger generations of what travel means, how we travel, and I don't see that going anywhere. And Vermont is hot right now. People are looking for destinations like Vermont. They want outdoor recreation, they want a rural, relaxing escape, and we've seen that. Everybody's coming to Vermont. Medium-term rentals, again, is an opportunity within this market. People are already taking advantage of that. I think that this trend will continue as well. Again, remote working has changed a lot of the way that people live and travel and move around. A lot of people are giving up their permanent residencies to spend 3 months here and then 3 months there, before they settle down. And who can blame them? It sounds really fun. And we're seeing a lot of opportunities in entrepreneurship and local job creation. The number of small-time property managers that are coming onto the scene, taking advantage of this industry, I don't have numbers for, but I feel like it's huge. Anecdotally, I'm hearing about it. I'm meeting these people all the time. I met 4 of them at this conference yesterday, who said, oh, yeah, I help people set up short-term rentals, and they don't know what to call it, but I'm like, oh yeah, you're a property manager. No, yeah. So that's very cool, and and we're seeing that vertical progression for folks who start as the housekeeper. They started cleaning short-term rentals, cleaning vacation rentals, and then they started managing them, and then they started, then they bought a house. So there's a lot of upward mobility opportunities for folks in this industry. And then I think the biggest opportunities and work that we have to do is really implementing and crafting those responsible short-term rental management tools. And that's the regulation and the enforcement. And along with that comes short-term rental owner and manager education. This is a huge piece, I think, that's been missing for a long time and could help address a lot of the neighbor relation issues and the false perceptions. But this is definitely an area where we have room to grow and are actively working on. And that's what I got for you. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or listen to any, emotional venting that you have.
Julie, I have a question.
And I know you said you just want to focus on the short-term rental, but do you think it's easier to do a short-term rental for 30 days or more, completely furnished, make a ton of money, or just be a year-to-year lease or 6-month lease, non-rented traditional? I mean, personally, I would say the long-term rental piece is a lot easier. There's a lot less regulations about it. I mean, we have to meet life and safety, but the money for the short-term rental seems to be.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
I can speak to that with a little bit of data, and also from a personal perspective of being a landlord and a short-term rental host. So the data is that the average work it requires to operate a short-term rental is 8.4 hours per week, versus operating one long-term rental, meaning annual, requires 1 hour of work per week. So in that sense, yeah, long-term rentals are much easier to manage. They have a different set of risks and issues that arise, but it's infrequent and typically very hands-off. But you don't make as much money. I think part of what's happening too with the increase of offering monthly furnished rentals is that if you're a housing provider right now, which is the term I prefer to landlord, especially as a woman, that if the price of housing is so high, and that's not just for renters, that's for people who are offering rental properties or investing in rental properties, paying taxes on those rental properties, upkeeping those rental properties. All those costs have skyrocketed for everybody. And when you look at even the inflated market rate for long-term rentals, it doesn't match up. If you're looking to go in the business of providing housing, you can't make any money. And we're hearing that from affordable housing developers too, saying it's not affordable to develop affordable housing. So a lot of people have turned to the short-term rental market as housing providers to diversify their portfolio, because if you have 1 or 2 short-term rentals in the mix with your long-term, that helps. That makes the numbers work.
Right.
Yeah. In my Burlington house, it's a triplex, 2 long-term and the studio short-term, and the studio was only a short-term for half a year. I have a nice UVM professor who rents in the winter. That half-year short-term rental alone padded the maintenance expense. The annual profit of that property was about $3,000 a year. But that's just the reality. The other aspect of that choice for individuals is there are different issues and risks involved with a shorter term, medium term, monthly rental renter versus an annual tenant. They're still under that Vermont tenant law, but the relationship between the two is very, very different. You have much more control over your property and the care for it when you get to go in there every month or 2. I think it's a really individual choice, and there are a lot of factors to consider.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll start here.
Yeah, I'm interested in, so I work for the ag agency here in the state and do marketing support for a lot of ag businesses. I also have an Airbnb rental on our property, and one of the things we do is we curate the kind of welcome packet and put a lot of effort into identifying some of those, local businesses, but a lot of local food businesses. So where can you go to a farm stand, a farm that does a pizza night? And I'm just curious, as you think about the role of association in trying to kind of what those needs are and how someone in my position might be able to help, kind of how the association might kind of operationalize that support. So we've talked about, could we develop directories for short-term rental hosts to then, make it easier for people to just find that information or include that in their welcome packets and stuff like that. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're just starting to get to that point as an association to have the capacity to do so. When we first started, it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction to an advocacy need. But now we have developed a lot as an organization and are actively looking to partner with all sorts of industries to help make that connection and help strengthen kind of all those, secondary and tertiary impacts that we see. And I'll give you some examples. We're starting a partnership with USCRI to help hosts connect with them when we have influx of refugee populations who need short-term housing. We partnered with Vermont Access, similar for women who are looking to come to the state for reproductive care. And I have been in touch with Lisa, Chase, and Tara about formulating some idea. We haven't really gotten quite there what it is and what it looks like, but the answer is yes, we're very interested in helping to facilitate those types of partnerships.
That's great. It's good to hear Lisa and Tara got to you before you.
Yeah. Tara and I are going to have coffee. You can come if you like.
So the question between when it hits the 30-day rental mark, is that something that Airbnb is reporting or is that self-reporting? Because often where people are taking more days.
Airbnb is reporting that.
Too.
Yeah. The caveat there is that Airbnb defines a monthly rental as 28 days, whereas the state of Vermont defines it as 30 days. So, and that's the minimum threshold. I don't know what the average long-term stay is on Airbnb, but yeah. So that's kind of a difference there. Personally, if I get somebody who makes a reservation for 28 days and is paying $500 in occupancy tax, I say, you might want to book for 30 days and not pay that occupancy tax. And they usually do. I'm sorry.